Most people I meet who just say that the Middle East, I don't want to hear anything about it. They don't want to know anything. I know you all think this is in the Middle East, it stays in the Middle East. It doesn't. It will affect you.
The mindset, I think, of the West after Iraq is, well, what Donald Trump articulated it. This is not our fight. Stay the hell away. This has nothing to do with us. Let them do whatever they're going to do. Is that fundamentally the wrong lesson?
Completely. It's the wrong and I think this is, again, one of the big ideas that I wanted to talk about with you is this one concept that will change everything. And it's so glaringly obvious.
Hello and welcome to Ways to Change the World. I'm Krishnan Guru-Murthy, and this is the podcast in which we talk to extraordinary people about the big ideas in their lives and the events that have helped shape them. My guest this week is the comedian and actor Omid Djalili, who is on tour at the moment with a show called Namaste, which we'll get into, but has starred in all sorts of amazing comedy films over the years. And I really feel like you're in the eye of the storm right now because as we speak, Syria has fallen. Iran has been in the news non-stop this year. And you, of course, are Persian or Iranian. But we've been trying to get you on this podcast for a long time. And
I didn't want to come on.
You didn't want to come on?
No.
Because because you thought this was a dangerous place?
I think this is the most dangerous podcast out there because thoughts and ideas are really powerful. And as everyone knows, there's a small ruling minority that are very happy with the way things are. And if you talk about changing the world in a positive way, well, they don't want those changes. So if you do think of something that is great and overnight you change world hunger, overnight you bring the globe together, the next day you may not even wake up because traditionally, whenever there's been a great invention or a great idea, those people have been snuffed out. And I'm worried because I've got lots of ideas. If I share that on here, it could be that you and I both wake up in a coffin, and I want to know, will you be wearing that? Because I don't want to be in eternity with a guy next to me like this.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm a little scruffy today. But I try to keep it sort of informal on the podcast. I mean, it's sort of, so you are a man with lots of ideas.
Yeah.
And unusually for a comic, you do want to change the world rather than just poke fun and scorn at it.
I do believe in the transformative power of comedy. I think that's something that I wholeheartedly believe in, only because I know that laughter is such an important thing in life that, you know, one belly laugh is the equivalent to like 20 minutes of yoga. It's good for you, the endorphins. We all need laughter in our lives. And a lot of people actually get their news from shows like The Daily Show. They turn to well-meaning comedians and philosophers to kind of get their opinions. And in this show, I actually talk about what are the nature of opinions, where do we get our opinions from? Is it our families? It can't be social media because social media is just an echo chamber. Could it be that we're British? I mean, you come from like an Indian background, I'm Iranian, but we're very British. And I talk about how my viewpoint is actually very, very British. But at the same time, I try and grapple with the nuances that are going on in the Middle East to try and kind of unpack most people I meet who just say that the Middle East, I don't want to hear anything about it. They don't want to know anything. But actually I said, if you come to the show, and the best compliment I had is when you arrive, I did a tour of America before I came. And when I got there, like in Seattle or San Diego, they don't know who I am. Like the sound guy doesn't know who I am. And the security guy doesn't know who you are. But at the end, they say, can I get a picture, please? I said, why? He goes, I like that show. I said, what did you like about it? He goes, I laughed and I learned. And I think that's the most important thing. That's the best thing you can do as a comic, is if you make people laugh whilst they learn something at the same time.
And do you feel now is your time because the Middle East is so center stage?
I think it's been my time for a long time. I don't think Britain kind of knew what to do with me. When 9/11 happened, I was kind of, before the days of cancel culture, I was cancelled just by being
literally cancelled.
Literally cancelled. I had a show. Episode 3 was supposed to come out on the Tuesday, and the show was off. And
literally in the middle of the run?
It was in the middle of the run, and everyone was thinking. I said, well, maybe comedy is not appropriate right now. And I said, actually, all my gigs were cancelled. And I told my manager, I said, is it because now? He goes, oh yeah, it looks like that people don't want comedy. But actually all those shows went ahead without me. The sitcom was dropped mostly because I was in it. There was no appetite for a guy from the Middle East. So I had nothing. I mean, I was literally cancelled.
Because all people from the Middle East are the same.
Or people in the Middle East are terrorists. I think that people actually thought I was like some kind of sleeper cell. And just when you like trust him, he's going to blow himself up on the set of Channel 4 News or something. So I think that's what I went through. But I fought back with comedy. And
how much have you lent into that then? With your comedy?
Yeah, I wrote specific jokes about it. In fact, there was one show that didn't cancel me, which is the Bloomsbury Theatre. I actually won the Time Out Comedy Award. The Time Out Comedy Award was a big, very, very prestigious award to win as best comic. Best stand-up comic that year as a club comic was me. But I never really got to enjoy that because it was 2001. But the Bloomsbury Theatre said you can still do a show. So I did the Bloomsbury Theatre and I was, for 17 days, I had to prepare for that show. And I actually remember the first joke I said, I remember it was something like, at a time where Middle Eastern people are being pilloried, there are a couple of Sikh guys that were killed in America because they thought they were Muslims. I think it's a time to stand up and really show people who you really are. And I want you all to know that my real name is Sven. I'm from Göteborg in Sweden. And it got such a massive laugh. And I remember the Guardian gave it a great review. And that's kind of how my career came back on. Then I went to the Edinburgh Festival. And then after the Edinburgh Festival, I had a deal with NBC to do a show, actually. I couldn't do my own show because then the tanks rolled into Iraq when they deposed Saddam Hussein. So they paired me together with Whoopi Goldberg, and I did Whoopi Goldberg's version of Fawlty Towers between 2003 and 2004.
Why did the Iraq War mean you couldn't do your own show? What do you mean?
I was preparing my own show with the writers from Analyze This and Analyze That, and then NBC said, look, the Middle East is still hot in the news. There are 15 pilots we're doing. We're probably only going to pick up one. It'll be a waste of time and money. So why don't we just pitch you in with Whoopi Goldberg, who's got this hotel comedy. There was a great hotel comedy that we were doing. And it was like that show was actually the lead-in to the final season of Friends, 2003, 2004. And we did one season. It got cancelled, unfortunately, because Whoopi was a big Democrat, and we were warned not to do too many Bush jokes, but I talk about it in my show. There was one Bush joke too many we did, and the show was taken off the air.
And in amongst all this pigeonholing of you, I mean, you say we're more British.
We're so British
than anything else.
Look at the way we talk.
Exactly. So how do you respond to that? The identity question. Sort of how you actually feel, and then how you actually were perceived and had to act.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, because all my life I've kind of had to lie about who I was. I mean, I wouldn't even say, during the Islamic Revolution of 1979, I was a young adolescent. I was 13, I had bum fluff, and I was really very British. But then I felt I had to pivot, so I became Chico from Italy. I changed my identity, I had to hide. I was also not a Muslim. I was born and raised into a Baha'i family, and the Baha'i faith is a faith that, I mean, it's such a huge thing to talk about, but it's a faith that has a connection with Islam, in the sense that it grew out of Islam in the same way Christianity grew out of Judaism. So there's a connection, but it's a totally independent faith. And the Baha'i faith is very much persecuted in the Middle East, which is why I was saying ideas are very, very strong, because Baha'is were killed, and thousands of them, because they felt that the Baha'i faith had principles that were there to undermine the ruling Islamic, I suppose, can't even call them a party, but the regime there. Things like the equality of men and women, things like the essential oneness of mankind. These are things which would undermine society. And in fact, the latest uprisings with Mahsa Amini in 2022, the Baha'is were very much blamed for that, because the Baha'is believe in the equality of men and women. The Baha'is had schools that were like empowering women, and a lot of people were blaming the Baha'is. So these are things that could get you killed. These are ideas that can put you in a coffin. Hopefully not with you, but these are just big ideas.
So where does that idea of the equality of men and women come from within the Baha'i?
The Baha'i, it's one of the main principles, that the equality of men and women is there, that you actually cannot have world peace until women are given, I suppose, proper share of the jobs which men are doing. And in fact, men can't achieve their greatness without equality.
So how do you drop that into your routines? These are big and challenging.
These are big
ideas.
and challenging. Well, you have to come and see the show.
People won't expect it coming from you.
No, they won't, because I used to do jokes about, coming back from the shopping and my wife be walking 20 paces behind me. That's because she's weighed down by the shopping. And people just assume I'm a Muslim. In fact, that's one of my big personal things to change the world. So we must never assume anything about anyone, because they're never usually what you assume they are. But you have to come and see the show to do that. But yeah, I talk about these big things and how it's a tough one, because I do deal with Gaza. I do deal a lot with Iran as well. And for people to understand Iran's position in the world right now and how they have been the epicenter of all the chaos that we see, and Iranians, I know it's difficult for me to talk about these things because a lot of people watching this show, there are Baha'is saying, well, we're non-political, so don't get political. You've got Iranians saying, well, you should say that Iran, once we remove this regime, there's not going to be a power vacuum as there probably is right now in Syria. We have a plan. We have somebody who's like the son of the ex-Shah who'll come and facilitate democracy and all that. He won't take any position of power. So I've got to be careful with what I say. If we take Syria, for example, it's all very well and good that, Assad has gone. But what's going to happen next is the one thing the West has traditionally never really taken much interest in. When Saddam Hussein went, we had to wait for the Chilcot report many, many years later to see that actually the power vacuum was terribly, terribly detrimental, and actually then created, ISIS and all these things came about. So it's a bit like the film The Graduate. I'm sure you saw The Graduate, and when you're a young kid watching The Graduate, you think, oh, it's this love, and the guy's got the girl from the altar, and they run away on a bus, and then you think, wow, they're so happy, but then Mike Nichols leaves a camera on them and they don't say anything to each other. And it's a big moment at the end of the film where he's saying, well, what next? What happens? And actually, because they've got nothing to say to each other, are they just going to repeat the pattern of their Californian lives and families that people get divorced or have cold love? And I think that's the same with Syria. We're all euphoric, but what next? And I hope now people are talking about, what is the power vacuum? Who is this coalition? I hear so many different things on Telegram, people saying, we are not ISIS, we're not al-Qaeda, we're just the People's Front, and we are against Hezbollah, we're against Iran. All those things that, as an Iranian, I'm happy to hear. But then you hear the guy leading them used to be with al-Qaeda. So what's going to happen? And all these women are being released from prisons, and they can't even believe they're being released. But what are they going into? Is it going to be worse for them or better? I don't know.
And also the mindset, I think, of the West after Iraq is, well, what Donald Trump articulated it. This is not our fight. Stay the hell away. This has nothing to do with us. Let them do whatever they're going to do. Mm-hmm. Is that fundamentally the wrong lesson?
Completely. It's the wrong, and I think this is, again, one of the big ideas that I wanted to talk about with you is this one concept that will change everything. And it's so glaringly obvious. And if children are taught this from a young age, it would change everything. If we were taught about the essential oneness of humanity, the oneness of all people around the world, then we wouldn't think that the Middle East is just over there. Like when you stub your toe against the leg of a chair and you go, it's the worst pain. But actually the little toe which you've stubbed is furthest away from your brain. So actually the signal to get from your little toe to your brain is the furthest away, but it still hurts. And I think that's how we need to see the world. And I actually tell the audiences, I know you all think this is in the Middle East, it stays in the Middle East. It doesn't. It will affect you. We will have terrorism here. We will have Islamism. We will have all these terrible things and other forces that will fight that, and we'll be in the middle of it. So this idea that the world is one and interconnected is something we have to start taking, not just as a nice idea, but as a truth, as a fundamental reality. If we see that, then we will care about the Middle East. We will care that we are part of one body politic. We are one humanity. And I think that's what people are screaming about.
What difference do you think that would make?
Then we would care. We can't just say, oh, these people, we're one family. We're responsible for this. And I think that is we have to take responsibility as a globe for each other. We have to see each other. I mean, I know it sounds idealistic, but if we don't do that, we're headed into more and more disaster.
I mean, idealism is better than the opposite, right?
Yeah, I'm a positive person. I'm amazed when people come on this podcast, they have nothing to say. And you give them a chance. You say, what have you got? And they say, you can't change anything. What's the point? What's the point of even us talking? I've just said to you, this is so powerful. You and me may share a coffin for the rest of eternity together. But I think that we have to remain hopeful. I mean, my name, Omid. Omid means hope. I mean, that's why I love my name, and I've never changed it. I've never even changed it to an English hope. And my first joke ever was like, my name in Persian, Omid means hope. It's a shame that Djalili means less. That was my first ever joke I did. But we have to remain hopeful, and we have to see each other as one. Otherwise, it's disaster.
I mean, when you talk about that sort of, getting involved and taking responsibility, I mean, you were very vocal during the women's protests in Iran, and you talked about Mahsa Amini, who was killed. What happened to that, though? I mean, that was a sort of a classic example of something that had a little bit of noise here, but not very much.
I'll tell you exactly what happened. Appeasement by the West. We've been screaming about this from day one, even before 2022. There was a wrestler called Navid Afkari who was going to be killed for some protests in 2019. We made a big noise. Even UFC fighters were saying we can't let him die. He was executed. And then with Mahsa Amini, what happened was we were saying the people of Iran are saying one simple thing: put the IRGC on the terrorist list. If you do that, then we will take care of everything ourselves. We don't need foreign intervention. And the rest of the world just appeased and they appeased and they appeased because they were expecting one thing. They were expecting behavioral change. Now, the way they were doing that with sanctions, sanctions have never worked on Iran. Sanctions is a bit like, I've always said this, is a bit like with Iran, giving that they have no behavioral change. It's a bit like being attacked by a bunch of zombies, and you politely ask them if they would consider a vegan diet. That kind of thing makes no sense. If you appease this, it's going to continue. And so we've been screaming about it. And we were saying from day one, after October 7th, now we know that, look, you and I have been around long enough that everyone talking about peace in the Middle East is really about Israel and the Palestinians. Ad infinitum, our whole lives we've been living with this. So we know it didn't start on October 7th. But we knew October 7th, Iran was behind it. And this is my big beef with my pro-Palestinian friends. And I've got Jewish friends, I've got pro-Palestinian friends, and I'm close with them all. And they always say, pick a side. I said, I have picked a side. I've picked humanity, okay? And I have told you, and this is what my pro-Palestine friends don't like, I have told you, once you remove the Islamic regime, it won't change overnight the relationship between Israelis and Palestinians, but it gives them a chance to sit down and talk, because it's always fundamentalism that drives this. And the money is cut off, because if you leave a lot of Palestinians and Israelis alone, they get on really, really well. They all want peace. But there are, as I said before, there's a minority ruling group of people who don't want it, who want this because it's creating arms, it's creating weapons, and wars is a big money-making thing.
So Syria is good news for you, isn't it? Because it's going to massively weaken Iran and could potentially cut the route that Iran uses to supply Hezbollah and Hamas.
The thing is, we don't know. I mean, I've just said to you, who knows what's going to happen with Syria, because who are these people who've taken over? At this stage where we're talking right now, I don't know. That's why I've kept pretty quiet on social media, because I don't think it's good to just mouth off before you know any facts. Now the people somehow have control. And I know all eyes are on Iran right now. What will happen with Iran? Who knows? I'm seeing signs from Iran. They're releasing the rapper Tumaj Salehi, who was someone we thought was going to be executed. They're trying to seem like good guys because they're worried. They're worried about Donald Trump coming on. Donald Trump, who, as you know, killed Qasem Soleimani. So he's going to be pretty rough with them. So who knows? I can't say who knows, but I'm watching it very carefully.
But to come back to the women in Iran and the protests there, I mean, I was in Iran in February this year, and it was when the elections were taking place.
And a great place.
We had a little bit of freedom to talk to people, which we normally don't have in Iran as journalists. And I was astonished by the openness and frankness with which some of the young women spoke to us. I spoke to a young student who refused to wear the hijab, and that's the striking thing. You go to Tehran, and there are loads of women who are walking around without their heads covered, and she said, people died over this. So the least I can do is walk around and not cover my head.
Amazing.
But she was taking a big risk, especially saying that on the TV. So I'm sort of quite astonished by the bravery of these people.
And as of last week, they've done a massive crackdown. There's now new laws being implemented that you can get penalties, fines, you can go to prison if you don't wear your hijab. But
and we don't know what's happened to the latest young woman who took her clothes off and went down to her underwear after being beaten and having her clothes torn.
Yes, Ahu Daria, as I'm sure people would be aware, she looked like she was down to her underwear. And then was dismissed by a lot of people that this is a mental illness, but she wasn't. And actually, nudity is a protest. You know, in the same way Rosa Parks took a seat on a bus and sat in the white area, that's a protest within the context of Iran. A woman taking off all her clothes. A woman taking off a hijab is one thing, but a woman taking off all her clothes is not mental illness. That's bravery of the highest degree, and it's a protest. And she stood there waiting to be arrested because she knew it would go viral. So from last we've heard, they've let her go. Parents have signed something that she was mentally ill, and that is that. That's all we know.
I mean, you joke about how dangerous this is, but I mean, you're a high-profile Iranian attacking the Iranian regime.
Yes.
They get very cross, actually, when I describe them as a regime, but the Iranian authorities.
Good, call them a regime, it's good.
Would you worry at all? I mean, have you been targeted at all?
I've had Instagram posts taken down. I've had people threaten me in my DMs saying, if you don't take this down, things will be very bad for you. I don't pay much attention to it. In 1992 or 1993, a very famous Iranian celebrity called Farrukhzad, who was kind of like, I mean, you could call him the Jonathan Ross of Iran before the revolution, was now living in Bonn in Germany, would often mouth off about the regime. And he was murdered with a knife to the neck and a knife in the mouth, which is a sign for you need to shut up and everybody else needs to shut up. But actually, there was very nearly an uprising that finished off the regime because of killing celebrities. So in a sense, you'd like to think they wouldn't dare. But then again, there's also Masih Alinejad, who was a well-known journalist, and she's got 8-9 million Instagram followers. She's been targeted 3 times. And if it wasn't for the FBI, she'd probably be dead. So it is something I'm aware of. I've had to cancel. I canceled one show recently last year only because I was calling for a ceasefire online. And I think there were some Jews were coming to say to me, no, you can't do that. And we have to obliterate Hamas and you don't know what you're talking about. So the theater said, no, let's just cut the show. We'll come and do it some other time. It was never been rescheduled. So I'm aware that people listen to what I say, which is why I'm trying to be a bit more responsible with any pronouncement on social media, but also very careful with the show itself. When you write a show, you think, what do I want people to come away with? I want people to go away uplifted, happy, they've had a laugh, and they've learned a few things. So it's very carefully curated to do that. And I would say it's the best show I've done so far. I wouldn't say it's the funniest show, but it's certainly been the most socially relevant show I've done.
So why Namaste, which of course
means this, yes, Namaste. Namaste means I'm trying really hard to sublimate my inner anger. And a bit like, petrol is energy, then it becomes kinetic energy. I'm trying to change that anger into comedy. And I think that's the way comedians work. It all starts from anger and outrage. And I was outraged by, and there are jokes at the beginning of the show to show I'm completely connected with what everybody feels. I'm in the same way affected emotionally, intellectually, morally outraged by what's going on. But, here are some, I wouldn't call them jokes, but here are some thoughts and observations to make you see things in a different way.
Because that's a sort of a unique talent, isn't it? To convert anger into laughter.
Yes.
I mean, newsrooms are pretty dark places. We joke about all sorts of terrible things. But it's a different kind of thing. That's a kind of almost a coping mechanism, I think.
Yeah.
But what you're doing is different. It's not dark humor necessarily.
Yeah, no, and it's not just there's jokes where we say that are funny for comedians in the room. Like there was a comedian called Chris Luby who used to do sound effects. He'd like if you go on saying now a marching band, and he could do like a Spitfire take, and unfortunately he died. And I remember them telling people at the Comedy Store. I wasn't there, but someone came in and goes, "Do you all remember Chris Luby, the guy who did sound effects?" Because he died. He goes, "Oh. How did he die?" He goes, "Well, it's actually quite sad. He fell down the staircase in his house and he broke his neck." And someone said, "Did he make the sound effects?" Which is so dark, but it's dark because it's dark and it's humorous. But I don't go down those routes because sometimes you can do a dark joke just to show other comedians, hey, I can get a laugh out of the impossible. I think this one is really, as I said, I'm a hopeful person. I'm trying to bring some light to that, and not just light as in levity, but to actually bring some understanding through the comedy. So yeah, it's not so much dark, but I think it's just funny stuff.
How did it begin then? I mean, how did the young Persian kid who pretended to be Italian think my way out of this is to go out to predominantly white audiences in England and try and make them laugh?
Allora, per favore, è possibile. That was one thing I used to do a lot. I always used to order in Italian because people, like, if you go in Edinburgh, some people you have to order in Italian. Can you get me the prawns? Because I said, "Sì, possibile." E gamberone. Can you take the shells off? You don't like the shells. I just speak in English straight away. But I think the way it happened was I did feel less than. I think that was because I always wanted to be an actor. I always liked watching The Graduate at the National Film Theatre when I was 12, 13. Was something that really impacted me. And certain comedy films I saw, like La Cage aux Folles, the French version, was extremely funny to me. And it was doing a sketch at school. We had a talent class, and I did a sketch at school, made the teacher laugh because you're going to do this at the assembly tomorrow in front of everyone. It was just a sketch. And I remember the sketch got such a laugh that the stage shook. I went to Holland Park School where, school assembly was 2,600 kids. So when there was a laugh, the stage shook. And I remember thinking, this is a great feeling. And I remember I was first year, and the girls in the sixth form were like saying, "Oh, you're funny and you're cute." And I got some attention. I thought, this is really great. Then I did a school play. And I think this is where it all really took off. I did a school play when I was 15. And the writer seemed to know Mel Smith from Smith and Griffiths Jones. There was a show called Not the 9 O'Clock News, which was actually...
we all grew up with and discovered comedy with.
We all discovered, and it was actually my generation, because I'm 59 now, and at the time, around 79, 80, I remember speaking to the producer, said that you were our target audience, 14 to 18-year-olds. And those days, you didn't press pause. You just learnt the sketches there and then.
You would come into school the next morning and
you
do
knew
the sketches.
Them off pat, word for word. I can do some of those sketches for you now, word for word. And so Mel Smith came to see this school play, and they obviously said to him, "Go backstage and say hello to the kids." But the other kids didn't know who he was, and I was watching the show religiously, so I was the only one who went up to him, and I hugged him. I said, "I'm a big fan of yours," and he goes, "Well, I'm going to be a fan of yours." And I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "You're really naturally funny, and you should think about it." I said, "Think about what?" He goes, "You should think about doing this." I said, "I've just done it," and he said, "No, I mean in the future." I said, "There's only the now." He goes, "That's really funny." He goes, "You're really funny." And I just remember, and the penny didn't drop until many years later, where amazingly, the first agency that took me on was Talkback Agency, which was run by Mel Smith and Griffiths Jones. And he remembered me. He goes, "Were you that kid? You were the kid, like you pretended that your trousers fell off and everything." So to have that kind of encouragement when I was younger, I think really affected me to try and give it a shot, not without consciously thinking it was a career thing. I just like making people laugh. I actually got expelled from Holland Park School because they said, we can't have you back. I wanted to go back with the sixth forms. We can't have you because you keep going into the staff room and playing piano naked. You pull it, because it's like Terry Jones in Monty Python. He used to play the piano naked. So I used to take my trousers off and run in and play the piano just to make my friends laugh. I used to chase first years around the playground on a scooter. I just liked having a laugh. And I actually got expelled doing that. So then I realized, well, actually, maybe I should think about doing this more seriously. So I went to university, studied acting. And then this was the big moment. Then I realized I need to pivot because I was doing drama school auditions and they didn't want me. And then it's a big racket. You had to pay 50 quid for an audition. It's a racket. And if you failed, they say, oh, don't forget to audition again next year or next term. And this one place in Wales, I said, look, if I audition again, you have to promise to give me feedback about why you didn't want me. They went, okay, fine. So I went there, got my rejection. I rang them up. I said, hey, I've been rejected. If you see there's a letter where you agreed to give me feedback, because yeah, we'll send you a letter. And this letter came that said, we thought you were very talented, but we don't know what to do with your ethnicity. Because of your ethnicity, we don't know what to do with you. You could probably get a few bit parts in a few films, but there's nothing we can do for you. And it made me think showbiz is just a white place where you've got to be white and speak in this Shakespeare. And I was there making fun of Shakespearean acting where you slow down and speed up again for no reason, then reflect as much unnecessary emotion in parts of the text where it does not exist, sire. I was doing all this at the audition. They were saying, this guy's funny, and he's kind of taking the piss out of us. So then they said, we suggest you just make it on your go on your own way. And I did that, and I kind of fell into stand-up comedy. And stand-up comedy, there's so many thousands of people want to do it, but it's like the one sperm fertilizes the egg. And amazingly, people laughed the first time I went up on stage. And I think that was it. Then I got immediate recognition and immediate encouragement from professional comedians. And it was only when Eddie Izzard, actually, I've got to give big props to Eddie Izzard, who just said, you're really funny, but when you come out with that accent, it's too funny, because then when you switch to yourself, it's a disappointment. He goes, why don't you just, I said, but Eddie, I need a character. He goes, no, you're funny as just go as yourself.
Which character was this?
I used to come out with this, I said, the fatwa on Salman Rushdie has been lifted. So on behalf of all dyslexics, we'd like to apologize for the death of Willie Rushton. Willie Rushton was an accident waiting to happen. And he said, look, he goes, look, this is too funny. And then I'd switch and say, actually, I work in an office. And I thought I'd give comedy a laugh, and it's going really well. I used to do that. And he said, that's too disappointing. You've got to drop the Arab shtick at the beginning. So I was really encouraged. And then he just said, and be true to yourself, be true to your thoughts and your ideas. So Eddie Izzard was really, he used to see me at the car, he used to come down and watch me. He goes, I used to come and watch you. And he still calls me up now and again. And says, yeah, he goes, you're fascinating to me because you're genuinely, he goes, I'm funny, but I'm like, we used to be back of the class, watch the funny people and study them. But you're genuinely funny. But I'll just give you this one thing, just drop the shtick and then be more authentic. And I think your career could go into orbit. So I'm really thankful.
And was he right?
Well, he was right. I mean, it took me a few months before I did drop it, but he was actually right, because now I don't do that. Maybe I'll bring it back. I'll do it.
You do it from time to time.
Now and again, why not? Because it's funny. It's a very energetic character. Why not? And if there's a funny joke you could put into it, it's fine. But I'm very grateful to him, and I think this whole sense of going into comedy, then being immediately encouraged, was a huge thing for me. I could feel you want me to carry on.
I do, yeah. It is very funny. Because I mean, what's amazing is that you weren't crushed by that drama school.
Yes, no.
Saying there's no. I mean, I had a similar sort of experience when I was a teenager, and I went and did work experience with some criminal barristers, because I thought I might want to be a lawyer. Right. And I spent a couple of days with them, and they said. And I said, I can't decide whether I want to be a doctor or a lawyer, because those were the only two choices if you're an Asian kid in the Northwest. And they said, well, the thing about the bar is it is very racist. Right. And you will struggle. And I think I found that so crushing, aged 15 or 16 or whatever it was, that I kind of thought, right, well, I'm not going to do that then.
What's the matter with you, Guru-Murthy? Are you busy thinking about your next booner? That kind of racism.
Yeah, well, sort of. Well, they just sort of said, if you want to get, if you want to get to the top, they said, what do you want to do? Well, why do you want to be a criminal barrister? I said, well, I grew up watching Rumpole and all that kind of stuff. And they said, well,
because we thought we were white. We thought we were British.
Yeah. And so I went into the much more secure profession of television presenting, which is much less.
Which you do very well, though, which is great.
By prejudice. But no, so the idea that were you spurred on by that?
Yes.
Or, were you angry about it? Or what happened?
I think that people like us, when I say us brown people in Britain coming through, and then I suppose, putting their heads above the parapet and doing particularly well. You have to have an inner strength. You have to have a mental fortitude to think. I mean, it could be delusion to think that people are wrong. I am talented. I can do this. And I do have something to say. And all along in my career, I've felt really angry about things and felt I've had things to say. If you've got nothing to say, shut up. But I've always had things to say. So when we're talking about this podcast with how to change the world, for me, I mean, being raised in the Baha'i community, we're very much focused on this thing called the twofold moral purpose, which is a commitment to transform yourself individually and become a better human being, but also contribute to society. These are two things we do in tandem. So those are things that kept me going. And along the way, I think I was always taught that actually to make mistakes and to err is to human, it doesn't matter. And if you're knocked down, stand up again. And I think that kind of resilience was something that was a combination of my faith, my ethnicity, and actually the encouragement of friends like Eddie Izzard and all these people who actually push you along. Because without that, without a sense of community, then you could easily be crushed. But in my head, I was always like, no, people are wrong. You got to give me a chance. Yeah, I can do ethnic bit parts, and I did that for a while. But what's wrong with taking on a lead role? What's wrong with me, carrying a film? I can do that. So I think it's a question of inner belief and actually realizing that life is just a journey, and you pick yourself up, you make mistakes, you get knocked down, but you always get up.
Well, I mean, you've come armed with so many messages today. I'm honoured that you actually have listened to the podcast, because a lot of people
I love the podcast.
Not having
it's a great podcast.
Any idea what it's about. So if you had to pick a way to wave a magic wand and change the world, what would it be? It
would be many things. There are some personal things, I would say. One I touched upon, which is never assume anything about anyone, and never take things personally. Because I think most conflicts, I mean, Archduke Ferdinand, the whole World War I, where poor people fought for rich people, it was all just because people were offended, and people took things personally. So that's one thing I would say. But also the concept of all the things I'm going to talk about changing the world are principles which change our, I suppose, viewpoint on who we are. And number one, the biggest thing that would change life is to realize what is the nature of a human being. Because there are many people who think that we're just animals. But the way I was told what a human being is, in the Baha'i writings, it says, split the atom's heart, and lo, within it you'll find a sun. And this is written before nuclear fission was found, because nuclear bombs created when you split the atom. And dost thou reckon thyself a puny form when within thee the whole universe is folded? So when you realize what humanity is, what a nature of a human being is, you wouldn't even raise your voice to someone else. You wouldn't, let alone smack them or kill them. So, and I think that is the thing they don't want you to know. They don't want you to realize the potential of each human being, wherever they're born, is absolutely massive. And if we do that, the respect we have for each other will be off the scale. And that's a game-changing idea.
I think you need to change your name from Hope Less to Hope More.
Hope More, that's my name, yes.
Omid Djalili, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for having me.
Sharing your ways to change the world.